Right now, something deeply unsettling is unfolding in Washington, and most people have not yet grasped how close it is to reshaping global power. This is not another routine partisan disagreement, and it is not merely another Donald Trump headline designed to dominate a news cycle. What we are witnessing is a quiet but consequential collapse of authority inside the Republican Party itself, exposed not through a dramatic rupture, but through a single, carefully measured hesitation. When the Speaker of the House publicly distanced himself from the president of his own party, not over taxes, not over elections, but over the possibility of military action connected to Greenland, it revealed a fracture far deeper than any speech or press conference ever could. That moment did not simply reflect disagreement. It signaled that control is slipping, fear is fading, and loyalty inside the movement is no longer guaranteed. Behind closed doors, Republican lawmakers are confronting a reality they have long tried to deny. They are counting votes they no longer reliably have, alliances they no longer fully trust, and political consequences they can no longer indefinitely avoid. At the same time, Donald Trump's rhetoric is escalating outward toward territory, confrontation, and global instability, precisely as his grip on domestic power weakens. This is where the story turns dangerous. History shows that when leaders lose control internally, they often seek dominance externally. What once sounded like provocation or distraction begins to take on the shape of a warning. Greenland is no longer just a headline. It has become a symbol of how fragile American power has become, how exposed political leadership truly is, and how close the system may be to making decisions it cannot undo. This moment demands serious attention because it is not about Greenland itself. It is about power, survival, and a political system pushing itself toward the edge. Before anyone has had time to slow down or fully process what was said, Washington feels like a darkened room where the lights have suddenly gone out and people are still moving on instinct, colliding with structures they assumed were stable and permanent. What we are witnessing is not a single comment or an isolated policy dispute, but the audible sound of authority cracking under pressure. That sound begins with what appears on the surface to be a small, technical moment, yet in reality exposes the raw nerves of American power in 2025. The Speaker of the House stepping away, however cautiously, from the president of his own party on the subject of Greenland is not a matter of personal preference. It is a reflection of necessity. To understand why this moment matters, one must understand the political terrain Mike Johnson is standing on, because it is not solid ground. It is thinning ice, and it is weakening by the hour. Johnson's speakership was never built on broad consensus or deep institutional loyalty. It was constructed through a fragile equation in which Donald Trump's influence over the Republican caucus supplied the gravitational force that kept members in line. As long as Trump could deliver votes with a gesture, Johnson could operate as though he possessed a mandate. That gravitational force is now weakening, and the evidence is everywhere. A House majority that once existed on paper has collapsed into something barely functional in practice. One Republican member has died. Another is hospitalized. Marjorie Taylor Greene, once a symbol of the movement's loud certainty and aggressive unity, has resigned. Each absence magnifies the instability. Johnson is forced to count heads every morning like a commander waking up to discover his army has shrunk overnight. In this environment, every public statement becomes a survival test. When reporters pressed him about Greenland, they were not asking an abstract foreign policy question. They were forcing him to choose which fracture line he was willing to widen. On one side stood Trump, escalating rhetoric about territorial control, military options, and even the possibility of abandoning NATO if it obstructed his ambitions. On the other side stood Johnson's own members, many of whom represent swing districts, exhausted donors, and voters who never consented to a geopolitical crisis over Arctic territory. Johnson hesitated, deflected, and ultimately distanced himself, and that hesitation revealed everything. This was not leadership, it was damage control by a man who knows he is one misstep away from losing the gavel. The Greenland issue does not exist in isolation, and dismissing it as a side shows exactly how democracies become blindsided by history. That is why Senator Chris Murphy's intervention matters so deeply. Murphy did not wave Greenland away as a distraction, even though doing so might have conveniently shifted attention from other controversies. Instead, he framed it as a strategic fault line. Greenland is not merely land and ice, it is a keystone in the architecture of the U.S. European alliance. Any serious attempt to seize it by force would not simply strain NATO. It would effectively end it, detonating decades of coordinated defense policy in a single reckless act. This warning grows more severe when viewed through the broader strategic lens. The United States cannot realistically confront the rise of China alone. Every credible long-term strategy assumes cooperation with Europe, shared intelligence, shared defense planning, and coordinated economic pressure. Shatter that alliance and the United States does not weaken China. It hands Beijing its greatest strategic gift, a fractured West too divided to sustain global leadership. In that context, the idea of military action in Greenland ceases to be absurd and begins to resemble an earthquake trigger. The fact that in January 2025, the United States is even discussing the possibility of deploying military force against Greenland should itself provoke alarm. That sentence alone signals how far the political conversation has drifted from any recognizable center. This fixation is not new. Trump floated the idea during his first term, and at that time, institutional resistance and allied backlash were strong enough to force retreat. The infamous diplomatic embarrassment involving J.D. Vance and his wife when local officials refused to meet with them was not an anomaly. It was an early warning sign of how corrosive this obsession already was. What has changed is not Trump's interest in Greenland, but the political environment surrounding it. Trump is now operating amid internal polling that flashes warning signals. The coalition he once believed unbreakable is visibly splintering. Republicans are resigning, others are defying him openly. Figures like Thomas Massie are no longer murmuring dissent behind closed doors, they are broadcasting it publicly. Don Bacon is threatening to walk away altogether. The aura of inevitability that once surrounded Trump's hold on the party is eroding, and history shows that when leaders with authoritarian instincts feel domestic control slipping, they often look outward for dominance. This is the framework through which Greenland must be understood. It is not about minerals, shipping lanes, or even Russia, despite repeated invocations of national security. It is about manufacturing a crisis large enough to reorder the political landscape, drowning internal weakness in external confrontation. This instinct is not unique, but what makes it dangerous now is the growing uncertainty over who is actually driving policy. As Trump displays increasing signs of cognitive decline, attention shifts to those around him, particularly Stephen Miller, who has emerged as a central force behind aggressive policy positions. Miller's influence is not subtle. He thrives in moments of escalation, pushing boundaries while others hesitate. His involvement across multiple policy fronts reflects a consistent pattern: confrontation as leverage, pressure as dominance. This is why the administration's messaging has become so contradictory. Actions are framed as law enforcement when constitutional constraints are inconvenient, and as military necessity when intimidation is useful. This ambiguity is not confusion, it is strategy. By blurring definitions, the administration attempts to maneuver without accountability. Yet this logic collapses entirely when applied to Greenland. No semantic maneuver can transform military deployment in NATO-linked territory into anything other than a hostile act. Lawmakers understand this, which is why resistance is forming even among Republicans who have long avoided confrontation. Resolutions asserting congressional war powers are not symbolic gestures. They are institutional alarm bells. For Mike Johnson, this pushback is both shield and threat. It offers procedural cover, but it also exposes how little independent authority he possesses. He is not directing events, he is reacting to them, trying to maintain balance as forces pull him apart. This is why Johnson's statement that the United States is not at war with Greenland matters. On its face, it sounds obvious. Politically, it is seismic. It directly contradicts Trump's willingness to threaten NATO for territorial ambition. It signals to nervous lawmakers and allies that someone in Republican leadership still recognizes the stakes. Yet it stops short of open defiance because Johnson cannot afford it. What we are watching is a party trapped between impulse and consequence, escalation and collapse. Greenland has become a mirror reflecting the internal disintegration of Republican power. It reveals a movement that pursued power for its own sake, and now, having achieved it, finds that power without legitimacy, coherence, or trust is brittle. Trump's vision of reclaiming momentum through territorial ambition offers no strategy, no benefit to ordinary Americans, and no plan for consequences. America First was once framed as restraint and focus. It has mutated into a slogan elastic enough to justify actions that could drag the United States into unprecedented conflict with its closest allies. Mike Johnson understands this. He knows a Greenland crisis would be catastrophic. He knows his caucus does not want it. He knows Trump's rhetoric is pulling the party toward a cliff. Yet he also knows that confronting Trump directly could end his speakership overnight. So he stalls, hedges, and survives one press conference at a time. That is not strength, it is a countdown. What makes this moment truly unsettling is not only what is being said publicly, but what is happening quietly behind the scenes. Lawmakers are calculating, not governing. Fear is no longer absolute, and when fear fades, obedience follows. The Greenland rhetoric has crossed a threshold where it is no longer noise. It has become a signal. Allies are watching. Rivals are recalibrating. Voters are absorbing impressions. Each contradiction erodes credibility, and credibility, once lost, does not return easily. This is not yet a decision. It is a narrowing window. Hesitation itself is becoming dangerous because normalization is underway. That is how democracies drift into crises they never intended to enter, not through sudden catastrophe, but through accumulated moments of avoidance and denial. Greenland is the stage, but the story is about something far larger, the slow, visible unraveling of political authority in the most powerful country on Earth.